Good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Live, brought to you by Crowcast, of course. Lots of news around the club and lots of things to talk about, not only at the Crows, but also around the AFL. So without any further ado, why don't we just crack straight into it, shall we? Good evening and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Live, this wonderful balmy Tuesday. I don't think it's balmy at all, Peter. I don't actually know what I'm saying. How you going?
Pretty well, mate. Yourself?
Well, clearly I'm a little confused.
It's starting on time. That's what's done you, isn't it? Starting on time.
Actually starting early. I just want to mark this occasion that we've started early, which is probably what the Crows need to do with their 2022 pre-season, I reckon. Oh, dear. Yeah. Shout out to everyone who's joined us on Discord. We've probably shocked a few people and they're scurrying to their devices to get on board on Discord. Welcome also to everyone who's joined us on YouTube. We appreciate everyone who's joined us live. Don't forget, we are interactive. So if you are on Discord and you want to have something to say, get around us on the live studio audience there, stick your hand up and we'll get you on for a bit of a say. Peter, as we always do on Tuesday night, what do you think about the weekend?
Well, I can only actually comment on the second half. I had a junior game that went a little bit late and ended up in the Edinburgh Hotel for a little bit of time, and so I ended up only scooting home for the second half. But look, there were some quite promising signs, apart from the fact, obviously, we fell apart in the last couple of minutes. But there's a couple of performances I was encouraged by. I was really quite encouraged by Strawny's performance in the ruck. I don't know how he went in the first half, but in the second half, he looked to me to be, a fair player, given the fact that the opposition that he was up against. So I thought he had a good game, and I thought it was probably Ned McHenry's best game for the club. I thought that he was able to, he was able to really find some ball, and so I thought he did well. And I think that if he can just get his production going in that way, then he'll become an increasingly effective player.
Question without notice, Peter, just quickly, while we're talking about Ned. We discussed briefly on Sunday night the value of maybe running Ned through the midfield a little bit. Now he's done that in the twos. Do you see any sort of role for him, even on a part-time basis, in the firsts?
Absolutely, no question about it. I mean, really, they're just he has a massive engine, and they're just sort of wasting that a bit at the moment, I think.
A little bit, yeah.
It leads into there's one player I was going to talk about, but I'll leave him to the side just for the moment, seeing as we've hit this part of what I was going to bring up.
Sorry.
Then have you seen the CBA statistics from?
Yes.
Just horrific, and
stupid.
And it leads into what you were saying about Ned and the fact that here we are, second last game against Melbourne, and we've got the three amigos with their, just dominating the centre bounces.
Yep.
And the only person that can get even half a look in is Harry Schonberg. He seems to have passed some kind of survivor test at training, and they're happy to have him in their little setup.
Well, he had to bash Nix's doors down to do it.
Well, yeah, that's right. I cannot understand how we, in a developing side, how we can, be denying on a week-to-week basis, and I reckon if you extrapolated those figures out for the year, they'd be horrific reading.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And yet we do silly things like in the previous round, I remember them at a crunch time in the Port game. I reckon it was with about 2 or 3 minutes to go. they chuck Riley Thilthorpe into the ruck. And it's like, well, okay, it's good that Riley's getting a little run in the ruck, but really 3 minutes to go in a game that, like, we're trying to hang on. I mean, they might have been trying to lose it, maybe. And no disrespect to Riley, because I think he's a more than serviceable ruckman. But it was just so counterintuitive. You leave those senior guys in the midfield rotations all game, and then you chuck a young ruckman in there at the last minute.
Well, they did the same thing, if you recall, they did the same thing for Ronan O'Connor.
Yeah.
Now, was that Fremantle? I can't remember which game that was now, but it was a winnable game.
Yeah, it could have been.
I'll tell you who it was. It was Collingwood. It was the Collingwood game, and that was down to the wire, and they just stuck Ronan O'Connor in the centre bounce in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game, where it was just hot as you like.
Yeah.
And of course he just didn't do that. But anyway, I don't understand that, and I don't understand if they're going to be developing players, and they've got to get guys running through that midfield and experiencing that centre bounce situation.
Even if only on a part-time basis, in my view. I mean, Ned, there's nothing wrong with Ned. I mean, there were, I think, what was there collectively? There was 28 centre bounces from memory. I think Sloaney attended, and I'm going off memory, we did cover this on Sunday night, but I think Sloaney attended 25 or something. Ben Keys was there for over 23, I think. Led was there for all bar about 3, I think. And Harry attended, I think, 16 or 18 or something like that. And that was it, basically. That was it.
Yeah. Mental.
I just... I don't understand it either. I don't understand what the value of selecting a guy like Tom Lynch is over Lachie Gallant. I keep rabbiting on about that, but it's worthwhile rabbiting on about it, because we were saying this, we were lamenting the same thing about Braden Cook for at least a month before his debut. And yes, he had a quieter game on the weekend, but he still shows class when he's around the agate, and you just wonder the value of 4 or 5 games at AFL level. And now, hopefully he stays in the team for the last game, but he could have had an extra 4 or 5 games and just really got a feel for it.
Yeah, so look, anyway, look, the player that I had just set aside that I was going to talk to you about, who I thought looked pretty good to me, was Benny Davis. Now,
yes,
what are your thoughts? Where do we go with him? Because I thought he looked pretty competent in the time that I saw him there. How did you see his game?
Well, I think he looked more than competent. I think he looked composed, and he had something that was very valuable coming out of that back half, Peter, and that was excellent foot skills. He made good decisions, and he disposed of the ball well, and at times quite aggressively. And a lot of people on various footy forums and whatnot say, Benny Davis has been on the list for 5 years, he should be more, blah, blah, blah. Let's not forget that he spent a fair amount of time on the injury list during those 5 years. And he also spent a fair amount of time backed up within the Crows, continuity mantra of the Pike years. And let's not also forget that he spent a lot of time in the Crows twos as a forward, and it's not easy being a forward in the Adelaide Crows SANFL team. So here's if you want my actual view, and this will piss a lot of people off, I think there's more value with putting Brody Smith on the trade table and keeping Ben Davis as a running half back than there is keeping Brody Smith on the list and delisting Ben Davis. That's my view.
Yeah, look, I can't disagree with that, because you'd have to be looking at a second rounder for Brody, even at his age.
Yep. Definitely.
And Ben Davis, you could relegate him to the rookie list and have him on minimum chips.
Yep.
And he could probably fill pretty much the role that Brody's filling at the moment.
Yep. And let's face it, and I'm not being critical of Brody because he is a very good player down back.
Yep.
But he's not an accurate short kick. His value is in clearing the decks and clearing a line with those long darts, He's not a very good spot up. He'll rarely go for the short diagonal. So Ben Davis and also Chase Jones offer something a little bit different, because Chase Jones is another who I'm really impressed with, even though he was a little bit quieter on the weekend. But his decision making is improved, and both he and Davis showed the ability to make good decisions under pressure and execute by foot under pressure as well. So, I worry about the fact that the AFL have come out and announced that they're not increasing list sizes, which might put the squeeze on Ben Davis. But I wouldn't be averse at all to testing the trade market with Brody Smith and keeping Ben on the list.
Yeah, no, he. I thought he was pretty impressive. I thought Darcy Fogarty. I mean, as I said, I only saw the second half, but he looked in pretty good nick. I think he took 7 or 8 marks. So
seven
kicked his 3 goals.
Yep.
So that's a good game from Darcy.
Well, it was a text game, Pete. I don't know whether you saw the lace out that he gave Shane McAdam. I think that might have been in the second quarter, so you might have missed it. But Darcy's game was very Texan-like, and I put it to people on Sunday night that if Tex Walker finished the game with 12 posies, 7 marks, I think, 7 contested marks, 7 marks, I think 5 contested and 3 goals won, you would be more than happy with that return from Tex Walker, right? And that's absolutely what we got from Darcy. Plus, we got a bit of presence around the ball in the forward line, a little physical presence from Darcy, and it was a 4-quarter effort. I actually think it was Darcy's best game for Adelaide in an overall sense.
Yeah. So look, I think that some good performances, and the other on the opposite end of the scale, Jake Kelly had a difficult day, I think, although I really don't think the last couple of goals were much his fault.
No, he also he copped a whack in the back of the head too in the second quarter, Pete, which you probably missed.
Yep.
And I think he might have got some staples and was probably a bit woozy, even though he obviously passed concussion protocols.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of those bloke going up for a mark and the knee straight in the back of the scon, which aren't good. So I wasn't overly impressed with Jake's game, but I'm willing to give him a pass on that basis.
Yeah, and especially the last. I mean, I know Fritz kicked 7, but those last 2 or 3 that he got in quick succession, that was just some diabolical midfield work in the centre square.
Oh, we were clearly rushing back to quarantine, I think. We left early.
But anyway, that's my, as I say each and every week, Vane, you can look at that game and you can see some positives. I mean, when I started watching, we got ourselves to within a goal, and I thought we were playing some, really quite good football, and there was some really, some good individual performances, and I think importantly, running through some of those good individual performances, we got some decent input from the younger brigade. I think that some of the, there's no doubt that the Rorys, have kept us in games in terms of their possessions and things.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they didn't look to me to be overly influential.
Not really. Sloaney had probably the best game he's had for a while. Rory Laird did what Rory Laird does. Benny Keys, I think, has been down a little bit in the second half of the year. I'm pretty comfortable he's carrying something. So, it was serviceable, but you're coming up against 2 genuine stars in Oliver and Petrarca. It looked like Schomburg at times was running with Petrarca, and I felt like Petrarca didn't have the influence he might have. So, whether that's hats off to Harry, it was a bit. I think Harry had 18 touches himself, and Petrarca certainly wasn't dominant.
No.
But it shows the gulf between our midfield and some of the other teams when you're talking about the gold-plated stuff that comes out of Melbourne or comes out of Western Bulldogs. It just shows you what we actually need. We've got a very workmanlike midfield, and that's about the best you can describe it with. And
nobody rotating through. Just not enough players rotating through. So hopefully that's something that they'll address. I'm sure it's something they'll address over the pre-season. I've been critical of Chase Jones and absolutely agree with you. He's been a revelation. He's kicking and his attack has been fantastic. So a real shout out to the way he's turned his game around. And, you know, he looks to me now that if he can carry that confidence into the pre-season, then hopefully we can see him push up into the midfield and be the player that we thought he would be.
Saved his career, Peter. He has saved his career. It's a credit to the kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he
no question about it.
Completely lost this time last year. Utterly lost.
Yeah.
So good on him. And he and Ben Davis at various stages rotated through Cozzy Pickett, and Cozzy Pickett really didn't have much of an influence on the game at all. So that's down, at least in some part, to the efforts of those two. So good stuff. Could you see any worth in playing Tommy Lynch instead of Gallant? Or for that matter, Shane McAdam instead of Gallant?
Oh, I just was quite astonished that Gallant didn't play. He'd had a ripper, but they've done it all year, Fane, where guys are in really good form, but they just don't seem to want to pick him. And Gallant, 4 goals. And then I noticed on the weekend, in a really difficult game against a tough top side, he's, and he hasn't seen a lot of the football, and he's still managed to scratch out 3 goals.
Yep.
So, he is in ripping form in the twos, and even if he just gets a taste on the weekend, that would be something. It's a shame that they're not going to give him 2 or 3 games in a row now, but just a taste would be good. And unsigned, yeah, that's a very, very bizarre.
Yeah, unsigned.
I mean, they need to make a call on him. Because we need, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, we don't have a reliable marking third tool.
That's
we
right.
do need that.
Yep, 100%.
And we need someone like a Mitch Georgiadis that Port have got running around.
Yep.
And either sign Lockie or draft Morgs. That's my in solution. One of those two.
Yep. Now, just segueing into injuries. Himmelberg obviously did his hamstring, so that's him out for the season. What are your thoughts on his future at Adelaide? Do you see him being retained or maybe used as some sort of trade scenario?
I got a funny feeling they'll retain him, Fane. Just because they've put a lot of development into him. They've signed him they've offered him a 2-year deal at the start. Was at the end of last year.
Yeah.
I think that he's in their future plans, and I just think that they will increasingly. Riley won't be anchored to that goal square kind of position.
Yeah,
and I think that they've. I think Elliott will continue to try and they'll try and continue to develop him in that second ruck kind of forward position. Yep. So I think I think they'll keep Elliott.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit more about our conversation last week about the configuration of the forward line with Himmelberg, Thilthorpe and Fogarty. And it got me thinking a little bit further, assuming Riley O'Brien retains the number 1 spot. Riley O'Brien isn't bad overhead, and his goal kicking is improved sufficiently that you'd probably back him in 50% of the time, I guess. So there's a real opportunity to actually rotate 3 ruckmen. Through ruck and forward, which would be because both Riley and Elliott are more than competent in the ruck, and Riley O'Brien is very, very good overhead, and I think that's actually a very interesting thing or interesting setup that the Crows should explore, because not many teams would be able to have that sort of setup.
No, and where it works, of course, is as we've talked about before, you've got Riley who can do other things on the ground, and even Elliott is very competent once the ball hits the deck. So they've got those skills that they can add. Yep.
And let's not forget, we got quite a few games out of a bloke called Maddie Roberts, who rarely bloody marked the ball. Do you remember? And yet our win-loss ratio when Maddie Roberts was playing was ridiculous. We won such a high percentage of games when Maddie Roberts was playing, just because of the way that we structured up around him. And Himmelberg could almost be a similar type of player, where he's never going to be the big clunker, although at times he can take them. But it's just his positioning is good, and like you say, he's good at ground level, like Matthew Robin was. So you never know. Never know.
I think he's got a certain versatility to him that will keep him on the list, for another at least see out his contract.
Yep. Now, we haven't heard of any more delisting, so let's talk quickly about Tommy Lynch and Daniel Talia, both a little disappointed but understanding of the Crows' position. Do we see a home for either of those two going forward?
I think that if we look at Tom first, I think that he would definitely find a home. I think the question for him is going to be whether he wants a home. So he's got, I think he expressed, he's got young children. He's settled in Adelaide. I think Adelaide's his home. I think that I'd be very, very surprised if there wasn't some coaching, offer in the background. I think that he would just have to be, he and his family would just have to be working through the numbers of what would inevitably be a far reduced salary moving to coaching than being a player. But, I can't personally, and I think I said this the other week, I can't see him leaving the city. I think he's settled, and I think that's it now. I think he'll just stay, and the club will offer him something. I don't think that'll be an issue. As far as DT though, I'm not sure whether there has been as many murmurings around coaching positions for him and what his future looks like. But I think but I guess in the end, Fane, it just boils down to I don't think that either of these two guys would be, in desperate need of the cash. I think it's fairly well known DT's, into his property, and I think he's made pretty good decisions over a long period of time on big money. And so I think that they would be looking at what lifestyle options they've got. Again, he's got kids as well. It would be a surprise to me if he, lands somewhere up like Gold Coast or something like that, just to play an extra year or two to squeeze out an extra, few $100K. I could be wrong. I'm just guessing at their personal circumstances, but they're just, I don't know. That's just my gut feel.
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty much the same, although I'm probably a little bit more inclined to think Tom might go for a couple more years, because he'd probably get 2 years at $350 a year somewhere like Carlton or somewhere like that in Melbourne, and that $700K is probably $400K more than he'd get in those 2 years in a coaching role in AFLW or as a development coach. So that might be a lure that gets a couple more years out of his contract, but out of his career. But like you, I similarly wouldn't be surprised if both of them pull up stumps.
I don't think there's any question the offers will be out there.
Yeah,
I think that provided they're fit, there'll be a team that will have a need for DT and for Lynch. There's no question in my mind that they could go around again and be effective players for certain clubs.
Yeah. So just a side-eye question. Remember last year or a couple of years ago when we played Daniel Talia through injury? I think it was last year. It was last year when we just kept playing him, and he was obviously injured and kept playing him. And as a consequence, he hasn't been able to get on the park this year. Again, we had is his early retirement, assuming that's the case, is that on us? Is that on poor player management?
There would certainly be a certain amount of responsibility for the club, but I'd also put a bit of responsibility on him as well as a senior player.
Yeah,
he has a well-earned reputation for keeping himself, and managing his body.
Yeah.
If he's going to the coach every week and saying, "Yep, I can play," and bear in mind, as I said, he's a senior player, so he'd be he's an automatic selection. So it's not him. It's not him saying, "Oh, if I better put my hand up, otherwise I'm going to lose my spot." He's not a first-year player.
Yeah.
He's got to take some responsibility as well for making himself available for selection.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. They do employ 938,000 sports scientists around the place that would have a fair amount of data as well that And the reason I say this is because, again, we've seen Rory Sloane run around all year, obviously not, in my opinion, looking 100% fit. And given the circumstances of the season, and, the rise of Harry Schoenberg and Ned McHenry and one or two others, again, it just makes you wonder whether we're running these guys into the ground simply because it's the Scott Thompson syndrome. You try telling these guys they're not playing this week.
Exactly. And, at what point do you sort of have to take that, and that's where, it's dual responsibility, because the club also has a responsibility to say, well, at what point do we pull the pin on this and say, you know what, you're not playing because, A, we're not getting best performance out of you.
Yeah.
And B, for the longer term, future of you as a player of our club, it's just not sensible.
Yeah.
And I think that this is where the problem can occur, particularly with the older players, when if they've got certain games triggers in their contracts and they need to, make sure they play 12 games to trigger this bonus and that bonus and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
All of those things come into it, and of course they're gonna keep playing.
Yeah, it's a problem with those games played clauses, because it can come back to bite you. But that's, I think, where you've got to be able to have a strong medical team and sports science team to have enough data to be able to say to blokes like Rory Sloane, look, your output is not significant enough for us to warrant, selecting you. Contract be damned sort of thing.
Yep.
All right, just running through the rest of the injury list just quickly. Of course, Smithers and Will Hamill are both on concussion protocols. You would expect to see Smith back if he's right, although the feedback that I've heard around the traps is that he hasn't bounced back as well as Will Hamill has. And the rest of the seasons, Himmelberg with his hamstring, O'Brien with his knee, Pedler with his ankle, Crouch with his groin, Talia obviously, Jack Haitley. See, there's another one, Peter. Reportedly carrying groins all year. What the hell is the point of playing him in the twos when the kid is obviously running? And we were wondering, remember earlier in the season, he didn't look to have any power. He was very one-paced, etc., etc., etc. All the hallmarks of carrying groin or OP or whatever. And I think I might have even wondered about his status OP-wise at one stage. And here we are, and now he's going to go in and have surgery. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I just couldn't. When I read that, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, just that's a classic example. I mean, you could argue that Matt Crouch has been handled a little bit similarly. Luke Brown with his Achilles, obviously. There's another bloke that probably could have rested and played instead of playing a couple of games between being out with that Achilles.
Yep.
And then Hinge and Miller, obviously.
I'm also, as NT Rabbit talks about Brody Smith and probably his fourth concussion, I'm really worried about the both of them. So Brody Smith and Will Hamill, neither of them should be back for this game, regardless of how they have bounced back or pull up. Both should be put away.
Yeah.
They've both had issues with concussion. So
yeah, a bit of conjecture on chat about where Tex is at the moment, whether he's in Broken Hill or not. I'd be very surprised if he's in Broken Hill, considering that they're in lockdown at the moment. We've got a hard border against Broken Hill because they found COVID in the water. Surprised. So I don't think he's in bloody in Broken Hill. If he is in Broken Hill, he's not come back to the club anytime soon.
No, supposedly he's coming back. It's been reported. So no, that wouldn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. All right. And yes, Yippee Whippy, we were talking about Haitley with groins. All right. Now, Peter, I think we would be remiss if we didn't take a moment to honour the 350 games of a club favourite who, unfortunately, for reasons unknown, hasn't ended his career at Adelaide. But what an absolute champion Eddie Betts has been over the course of 350 games, and how privileged were we to be able to have front row seats for at least half of that.
Absolutely no question about it. Just a joyous player, and some of the memories that I've got of being at Adelaide Oval with him playing some astonishing football. And I think we were really lucky. I think we had the best of his career.
Agreed.
Here. I think that he was in the form of his life. And for a few of those, it was almost back to the old Modra days, wasn't it? For a few years, 100%. He was the big kid in town.
Yeah,
he was the big kid in town. And he gave us a lot of joy. So yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to him, and I've got no doubt in my mind, Fiend, that he would always be a favourite son and welcome back at the Adelaide Football Club whenever he wanted.
And I hope he feels that. I hope he. It's been a bit back and forth with him about, I'm a Carlton boy, I'm an Adelaide boy, I'm a Carlton boy sort of thing. But I hope that the club does everything in its power to make sure that Eddie feels welcome. And he hasn't played 200 games for Adelaide, so he doesn't qualify for life membership, Peter. But surely somewhere in our constitution, there's room to honour him with the honorary life membership. Surely.
Yeah. Yep,
I think he deserves it.
Who would worry about that? Yeah, who would oppose that? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. He should have he has got unofficially a pocket named after him, and I think that the guy has earned Adelaide so much money in terms of ticket sales and engagement, etc., that the least they can do is honour him with life membership. So I hope that is a consideration, and I might even fire off an email on behalf of Crowcast to the footy club just to stick that in their heads, just in case they haven't thought about it.
Do it, mate.
Of course, we've also got in the AFL, we've got the situation with Al Clarkson deciding to go out with a bang. Don't you love the fact that he won't drop a game? After he got the shaft, he's just gone, all right, Jeff, I'll show you. And he's cost him about 4 draft spots.
Yeah, he said, sorry, I'm not going to, no more tanking for you.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you see him at Collingwood or Carlton, Pete?
No, I don't. I think that if the media's to be believed, and of course, how often have they misled us? But it seems very, very firm and very clear that he's taking next year off. So a bit of gardening leave, I think, and then reassess his options the following year. And it may well be that there's maybe a club that he fancies that there's a coach under contract, and who knows what's going on behind the scenes. But my gut feel is that we won't see him coaching next year.
Yeah. Here's my opinion. How long has David T got to go on his contract? I reckon he's got another year officially. Yep. I reckon their review will come back saying we'll give Teague half a season to see if he can turn it around, and they'll have Clarkson on speed dial. That's my opinion. If Teague gets retained, I'd almost guarantee that Clarkson will end up at Carlton. Obviously, Ross Lyons back in the chat about the Collingwood position. I think that's almost inevitable that Ross Lyon will get the Collingwood job because they just want a big name. Yeah.
Don Pike was being talked about as getting close to that one.
I don't see it.
Is he a big enough name? Probably not.
I don't see it. He doesn't seem like the type for Collingwood. And I'm not basing that on anything other than just my own probably flawed intuition. But I just don't see it as a good fit. And I think he's actually embedded himself quite well into the Sydney system. And Longmire's not going to be there forever. So whether Donny's next... Anyway, I don't see Harvey getting the nod from caretaker. I don't think he's actually done enough. And he seems a very unassuming, quiet, almost introverted type. Doesn't actually strike me as head coach material, Pete. But
no, I think that's probably a fair
Who the hell am I?
I don't think there'll be a lot of coach, in a general sense, I don't think there'll be a lot of movement of coaches at the end of this year.
Yeah.
The only one that I could think may be under pressure would be Stewie Jew.
Yeah.
Up at Gold Coast. Teague obviously is under a bit of pressure, but he's got another year to run on the contract. Whether they, as you say, they might just give him half a year next year.
Yeah.
Other than that, you could run down them, and I think that most of them are right. Most teams have either had seasons that they would expect to have, in terms of the lower positions, and they've already taken action, i.e., Collingwood, or.
What about Adam Simpson?
Yeah.
Because West Coast aren't going to make the 8.
No, I don't know what his contractual situation is with Simler. The difficulty they've got there is that he's a premiership coach. Now very difficult to sack a premiership coach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even though it's 20, he probably gets a go at some kind of rebuild if that's what they need.
Al Clarkson was a premiership coach. Anyway, obviously, I can't think of too many. I can't think of any others really. Stewie Jew, I reckon, will continue up at Gold Coast simply because they can't afford any more bloody turnover there, I don't think. Look, they had a bit of a patch either side of the bye where they actually didn't look too bad. They need more. They're in a similar position to us in some ways because I don't think they have the right age profile in that squad. And you just think maybe a couple more years if they can hold that squad together, and they've had a couple of re-signings and whatnot, they might actually lift a bit. But who'd want to play? The
problem for me is that they seem to. They seem to be trapped in an endless cycle of the AFL stuff their pockets full of young, brilliant players.
Yeah.
They spend 3 years developing them, and then 4 years developing them, and then when they get to the point where they could be a good team, they all go back to.
Yeah. Well, Ben King's going to be the one.
He'll be the one that'll go. There's talk of, Lukosius Rankin. Their Rankin in particular has had quite a bit of smoke around him.
Yep.
Coming back here, so it just seems to be an inevitable cycle that they can't break.
Yeah. Well, let's segue then into a few whispers, and we'll start off with Isaac because there has been a bit of smoke around, and Luco as well. Apparently bought an investment property in Grange, and which sent tongues wagging, unless people realise that his whole fucking family lives in Grange, Henley Grange. So it's not as if it's foreign territory for him. Would you? Well, all right. Lukosius first. Would you sacrifice any picks to get Jack back next year?
Next year?
Well,
when does he become a free agent?
I think it's next year. Or no, he's not a free agent. He comes off contract at the end of next year, I think.
I think it's the year after he's a free agent, isn't it? 6 years.
Yeah. Restricted.
Or maybe the year after that. Yeah. So, look, both of them are valuable players. I think that the way that their careers have developed, I have a funny feeling that Isaac's is going to end up with the high ceiling. I think he's the one that hasn't really got out of himself what we could really see. I think you could really see a real sort of put a team on your back, all Australian. I think he has that ceiling if he could get his mind right, if he could get his body right, all of those things. I think what's happened in the last couple of few years, Fane, is that Jack's become a little bit more exposed, just in terms of the fact that he's been playing football.
Yeah.
And I think that we're not seeing him develop into the key forward that he was drafted as. And what we're seeing is him be, a very, very effective distributor out of defence or a tall wing.
Yeah.
Now, so you've got to actually ask yourself, right? Well, how much do you want to pay for a wing? And I'm not playing down that position, but I don't think he's going to. It doesn't look to me as though he's going to develop into a key forward. I think he's going to end up being, what he is. I mean, he's played 50 games now.
Yeah.
So I'm just not quite. You'd love to have him at the right price, but I'm just not sure you'd break the bank. And whether you just leave it for a couple of years and say, look, whenever you're ready to come home as a free agent, then you're going to be 25, and we'll pay a salary. Isaac, I think, is a little bit different. I don't think we've seen his ceiling.
My thoughts on Rankin is that I think he needs a crowd.
Yeah.
I think he needs the energy, and I think he needs a crowd. And he's a bit of a, not a show pony, but you know what I mean, a showman, let's call it, I guess. And I don't think the environment up in Gold Coast really is conducive to him getting the best out of himself. Now, you can argue that players should be professional and perform anywhere and yada, 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 and that's all very true. But sometimes players need a bit of a push and a bit of motivation, a bit of energy around them to actually, get that extra 10%. I wouldn't be comfortable paying a first rounder for Isaac, particularly given what he's produced this year. But I reckon if you could get something around a second rounder with Isaac Rankin, you'd strongly consider it. As far as Lukosius is concerned, I'm probably a little bit more bullish about Jack than you are. Your comments just then. I think he's still got something to offer, either as a running wingman or maybe a third forward, Pete. But again, it comes back down to price, doesn't it? Is that the price you want to pay? How much is his draft ranking going to play into what Gold Coast is going to want for him? And is that the price that you're willing to play for a player in that position? And I'm not sure it is.
And that's my concern.
Yeah. Yeah, I reckon Rankin's price might be more palatable.
I think it might be, and even maybe some exchange of picks somewhere along the way, even just a slight downgrade in a pick or something like that. Maybe I don't know. I mean, if the way the draft is looking, if we end up with, I don't know, we end up being 2 picks ahead. Let's say we lose, they get 4, we get 2.
Yeah.
Let's say that North Melbourne grab Horn. Let's say that we, we're not particularly enamoured with someone like a Callaghan.
Yeah.
Because his connections in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then if you're throwing a blanket over the next half a dozen mids, maybe we're in a position, and where Gold Coast might be interested in, swapping our firsts and a little bit of the business at the back end and say, will Isaac be part of that? I don't know. That's just something that... But that's assuming, I mean, point in the chat, we probably won't even have pick 2. I kind of fancy us this weekend. I think we'll probably win. Could end up with pick 4, Fang.
Yeah, well, here's something for you then, because to be honest with you, I don't think there's actually a lot of difference between us getting 2 and 4 in the first round, at least. Obviously, it hurts you a little bit in the second and third round. But in terms of the first round, I think it's Jason Horn, and then, like you said, there's a bit of a flight risk with Callaghan, and I'm not quite sure what's coming out of the West, but there doesn't seem to be anyone bobbing up at the very peak of the draft from there. You could probably argue that Maddie Roberts is the next best ranked South Australian, but given his season and exposed form, and he's probably suffered from a lack of exposure at a carnival, I reckon Maddie Roberts might slip down to between 5 and 8.
I think that's why it's looking at the moment.
Yeah. So if we've got, let's say we've got 4, for example. Do you reach for Maddie Roberts, or do you try and split that pick?
I think you go and split the pick.
That's my thoughts too. And I actually am starting to wonder whether there was some discussions with Jason Horn during the course of the year that made us actually cool on the number 1 slot, which then kind of made it less important for us to finish, bottom 2.
Yeah, quite possible.
This is all fanciful. That's not based on anything. It's just, trying to draw, join the dots.
Yeah, and I think that the difficulty is that again, the junior system is going to be affected by COVID. So this will be another COVID-affected draft.
Yeah.
And so, it's going to be very, very difficult. And you're going to end up again, there'll be a blanket thrown over about you could throw a blanket over probably 3 to 15, to be perfectly honest.
Yep.
The way that I've looked at it, and so I think it probably ends up being, unless you've got one, it ends up being one of those, Raul Anderson years where you sort of think, unless you're getting one of those two or the top one, then we're going to just
Well,
so no one really.
And they always say, you take the best available talent with your first round pick. Well, I don't think it's that sort of a year this year. I think and particularly the situation the Crows are in list-wise and what our specific needs are, you'd absolutely throw your toys out of the pram if, for example, we drafted a bloody centre-half back. So then...
Well, there's one there, so let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. So then you think to yourself, all right, well, then you've got to be strategic. You've got to, within that list of players that you could throw a blanket over, you think to yourself, all right, well, who's the kid that we want that is going to provide us potentially with, the outside silk, or the, if you're not sold on Lockie Gallant, the marking third forward, or, something like that. I think our needs list-wise are actually quite specific this year. And I have to say that I don't know whether Maddie Roberts is that need. And it's not that I don't rate Roberts as a player, but I'm just not quite sure that he's. I don't think picking Maddie Roberts is getting maybe the best for what we want out of this year's draft. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think though I wonder though, and it probably leads into just something we were going to have a little chat about, and that was that South North game.
Yeah,
on the
smash
weekend.
Into it now if you've got time, mate.
Yeah, no, I've got time. So it was a really, really important game to watch. I'm not sure if any of our listeners had a chance to see the South North game, but the three boys played together. Three close mates had the chance to play league football together, which was great.
Yep.
But I thought what you really, let's just put Jason aside because he actually didn't have a very good game anyway.
Not really, although you could still see the talent.
Yeah, so I think that it was interesting what you saw in terms of if you were putting yourself in a position to take both Matt and Arlo, you saw the difference that you get with the two players. They're nothing like each other, are they? Nothing like each other.
No, and the thing of it is, Arlo comes at you with a second rounder. Don't you think?
No, he won't. I think that just even that performance on Saturday will get the tongues wagging. He just looked so good, didn't he? He was clean. His disposal was immaculate. He actually reminded me a lot of Robbie Gray, the way that he just seems to have that rubber body.
Yeah, fair comparison actually.
And he has got such a ceiling because he played as a high half forward, and just the way that it's his first game. His first game of league football. He had 12 possessions, and he just. And a really nice tidy goal as well. He just found space with ease, and he just used the ball so well. And what we didn't see from Arlo is what he can do, and is that he has got some real tricks around the stoppage.
Yeah.
So because he was playing that high half forward role, we didn't see him around the midfield.
Yeah. So
he's that. He says a real thing was what you saw with Matt is much more workmanlike.
Yep.
Just makes the right decisions, and Matt, Matt's not. As much as I've talked him up, Fane, I'm here to hand on heart. He's not an attractive player to watch in so many respects, but he's just got engine room written all over him, and he just gets hold of the ball all the time.
He's Simon Goodwin, isn't
he? He had 20 possessions and 7 inside 50s.
And looked quiet.
And looked quiet.
Yeah.
He didn't use the ball as well as he normally would. He looked a bit rushed a couple of times, and he played in the wing. And they're very, very different styles. And both close mates, good for the locker room, and both hard-edged Crows fans. Both big Crows two boys. And so what you get if you split your pick is you'd get some really good an inside grunt with a magnificent cannon of a left foot.
Yeah.
But you'd also get that player that's a little bit more special, which is Arlo.
Yeah. And I must admit, Arlo Draper really, he's the one for me. I don't really, well, I do care obviously who we take in the draft, but I will be very excited if we draft that kid. And of course, you can never predict the career, but like you say, you can see innate talent, and it just seems to me that Arlo has that innate little bit of X factor. Just something about him, and it took him a while to work into that game on the weekend, but in the second half in particular, you started to see some stuff that just made, like you said, made you just sit up and take notice.
Interesting, I heard him interviewed through the week, an interesting little fun fact that Arlo actually gave football away between the ages of 11 and 14.
Yeah, I didn't hear
all that time, all that critical time in development, he preferred tennis. So he didn't even have the boots on. And then the three of them got together at under 14 level. That was when they first played together, Jason, Arlo and Matt. And so they're three really good close mates, and they've had all of those experiences all the way along. So, anyway, look, who knows whether we look at that and say, from a player, from actually getting a really good settled team lineup, because I do feel that there is this, focus on the South Australian boys at the moment. We do seem to be heading that direction.
Yeah.
And they'd look at that and say, look, here's two close mates, two Crows fans. One is, has that Robbie Gray, outside sort of, a little bit of magic, as you say.
Yeah.
And then we've got this other blue collar workman who will just get us, 30 possessions every week.
Yeah. Yeah. And use it pretty well.
I don't know. And use it very well. So I don't know.
Yeah, whether they got the balls to do it remains to be seen. I noticed someone earlier on the chat was saying that Matt Rendell reckons that Benook's got the chop at Adelaide. I hadn't heard that. Anyway, no, haven't heard that one. So interesting times. Obviously, Crowcast, as we were last year and previous years, will be all over it at the end of the season. That's when the fun begins for the Crowcast during down times at Adelaide. So Pete will certainly have a bit of a list review in the off season and leading up to the trade week, etc.
I'll be fully, as you will be, I'll be fully expecting our listeners to be all across, particularly the South Australian boys. So they should know them all.
Yep, and, absolutely. Yep. All right, well, look, it doesn't look like anyone wants to have a chat with us tonight, Peter, so we might wrap it up there. Thanks to everyone who's joined us on Discord tonight and also on YouTube, some familiar faces and also a couple of new ones there on YouTube, so fantastic to see that. Don't forget, game day, get around us on the Stadium chat on the Discord server. If you want to support the Crowcast, go to patreon.com/AFL Crowcast. All your support is very welcome. Thanks, Peter, for joining us once again. And very much so. And thanks to everyone who's chatted along with us. So until Sunday night, stay safe and we'll see you then.
Cheers, guys.
Not all.